27th, Board of Waterworks Trustees meeting. It is 3:30, almost. The first item we have is a consent agenda. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? No discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Second item, we have a public comment period. If anyone from the public, staff, or anyone else wants to make any comments to the board, we have 5 minutes. There's no one that wishes to speak to the board. Okay, we'll go to our action items. Number 3. Item A, the 2013 Security Services Contract. Bill?
And we had discussion at the Planning Committee about this. Essentially, we are extending into 2013 under the terms of our current agreement, an agreement with Permar Security. The money for this is approved, will be approved in the budget in item C. As I mentioned briefly at the Planning Committee earlier, I would see in 2014 some likely changes in how we approach security, but the item before you is to essentially extend our existing agreement with Permar for the calendar year 2013.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved. Second.
Discussion?
Bill, this is an unrelated thing, and maybe you're going to touch on it later. Are you going to give us an update on the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the guy driving through the park?
No, I'll be happy to provide you with what little information I have on that, Graham. Ted may be more knowledgeable, or let's see Scott here.
I mean, at some point I want to make sure that, I just want to hear what you're doing about security and, and that type of thing, and this may not be the right time.
It's the right time if you raise it here, so let's talk briefly on that, if I may. First, on the issue of the vandalism for Jolly Holiday Lights and Make-A-Wish Foundation, my understanding is Des Moines Police, through a number of different resources, including the courtesy of the vandal in leaving his license plate on site, were able to trace to the specific vandal and charge him with criminal mischief. My understanding is some $30,000 in damage associated with that. I know that our park security officer on duty Sunday morning was the one who initially found the damage, contacted DMPD, and is working on our behalf to ensure that the criminal prosecution is being pursued vigorously. We're certainly mortified, I guess would be the right term, at the actions of someone who is a guest in our park and the damage that they took out on the light display, and more importantly on the charitable foundation really in play here. But we will continue to review with Make-A-Wish in particular what additional security we can provide reasonably with a park of this size, as I'm sure you recognize, and the vulnerability of tens of thousands of dollars of lights in the park. We are simply unable to be a guarantor, if you will, against these kind of actions. But I'm confident that in working with them and working with DMPD, we can continue to learn how to best protect within a limited fashion, given the park, the kind of assets that are here for this fundraiser, and do everything we can reasonably to be able to prevent a reoccurrence. But ultimately, stupid people do horrible things. That's what happened here, and being able to guarantee against stupidity and vandalism isn't something that we're going to be able to do fully, but we much appreciate the difficulty that this caused for a number of folks. The community has come together very well in how they've addressed this, and we are thankful that DMPD was able to take specific criminal action here against the wrongdoer.
And you'll just continue that discussion with Make-A-Wish and others about making sure that
We will. Ted, anything that you wanted to add in addition? Ted is unfortunately had other duties this week in addition to the vandalism here dealing with the LA departments, which we will talk about later on.
You've shared everything that I know.
Thanks.
That helps, thank you.
Well, let's hope the public shows their support of the organization by driving through and paying a contribution to see the jolly holiday lights.
Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item B, 2013 water treatment chemicals, analysis of bids and authorized execution of the contracts.
I'm happy to say that Mike McKiernan and our purchasing staff that work for Peggy Freeze have procured almost $3.7 million in purchases here, a very large number, but actually we're experiencing savings relative to what we've seen in the past because of some hard work from production and purchasing on this, and certainly the staff recommendation is to approve this purchase for next year in some $3.7 million.
Is your motion?
So moved.
Second?
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Item C, we'll have a public hearing on the budget. We'll open the public hearing and ask for comments from the public. Bill, do you have any written comments?
We have received no written comments on this. We certainly would invite any public comment at this point. These matters were discussed in open meeting earlier at the at the Finance and Audit Committee level, and we again would welcome any public comment if there is none. Otherwise, we would encourage your adoption of the 2013 budget following a close of public hearing.
In that case, we'll close the public hearing.
You may want to ask one more time, David,
Oh.
if there any public comment on the
still have any?
2013 proposed budget.
Do we have any public comment for the 2013 proposed budget? With no comment, we'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I move approval for the 2013 Des Moines Waterworks budget.
Second.
Any comments?
I want to thank our staff, and I know that you made the comment, Bill, when we were meeting, that Gary Benjamin really kind of
Absolutely.
carried the water on this one.
Yes, you did.
And so we appreciate coming in exactly what we were hoping to be able to
Yep.
do, and the result, as we discussed in the finance meeting, is a minimal increase, and we do appreciate what all of the departments did to look for additional savings so that we could deliver this budget. So nice work.
I would echo that, and I would also, maybe this is for Sue and for Bill, but as we go into next year, we have a discussion early on in the year about how we're going to approach next year's budget and the process that we're going to follow. I mean, this is going to be your first year in the chair, and I imagine you have some thoughts and some ideas. You talked about them last time.
I do, and I appreciate the question. What I would intend to do is the end of the first quarter or the beginning of the second quarter, that is March or April, really have a discussion at the Audit and Finance Committee level, and I'd be happy to also do that at the Planning Committee level about the process and some changes that I would see in process for calendar year 2014.
That's good. I mean, I think that's that's part of the thing. The opportunity that we discussed when you came on board, I think really starts next year, or how we approach the budget, how we discuss it, not only as a board, but with the public. So I look forward to that.
Excellent.
And I think the sooner we have that discussion, the better.
Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Item D, 2013 to 15 labor agreement between Des Moines Waterworks and ASCME, Iowa Council 61, Local 3861.
And this is one that I really encourage comments from the audience. Ron Smith, Greg Lewis is here on behalf of ASCME. Their negotiating teams have spent a great deal of time, a great deal of energy on the issue initially of looking at a one-year wage reopener through very constructive discussions that has now become a 3-year labor agreement. The economics are before you essentially. They are a 2.5%, a 2 3/4, and a 3% increase beginning calendar year 13 through calendar year 15. Been very constructive discussions, at least from my perspective. There are a number of outstanding issues that remain of interest to both the union and to Waterworks management that we will, in the interim, discuss and report back to this board on within the next 6 months. But those discussions have been very constructive. I very much appreciate our relationship with the AFSCME Council and our employees. These are always interesting discussions in any context, but given my newness to the organization, I'm particularly pleased by how constructive those discussions have proceeded with a 3-year agreement in front of you. Item E is somewhat related because, as you know, in our context here, the staff salary plan is driven by the discussions with our labor unions, our labor union, AFSCME here, and to drive our recommendation for the 2013 confidential professional and supervisory compensation plan. I do want to mention that one can argue that the 2.5%, the 2 3/4, and 3% is generous, and perhaps generous to a fault. Would not be my conclusion, incidentally, but I do believe that our employees have finished a very difficult year in terms of both water production and water distribution, as well as all of the staff support necessary to keep those business elements moving forward. I'm very pleased to be able to make the recommendation on behalf of staff here for the 3-year agreement in front of you. And again, want to thank the constructive discussions we've had with the AFSCME Council in negotiations. You have a number of detailed pieces on additional issues, including, as an example, insurance contributions. It's my understanding, briefly, in talking with Greg outside in the hall, that the membership has approved the negotiated recommendation that's before you now. Greg, anything you wanted to add to that? The membership has approved it this afternoon. Is that my understanding?
I would thank you and the board for.
Hey, Greg, could I have you come up here? I apologize for interrupting, but we're televising and
Well,
recording both.
We would thank Mr. Stowe and the board and the support you've shown the employees here, and the employees in turn show strong support to Des Moines Waterworks. They do an excellent job, and there's no one problem I have with this negotiating here is there really isn't a comparable. The work that is done here by these employees in the trenches, as we like to say, is there's no comparable anywhere. I know that there's other waterworks around, and they are also highly skilled and dedicated, and it shows in the product they produce. The only thing I would also add is it wasn't me. Bill was very gracious in naming me, but it was the committee and the group of employees here that listened to their membership, and that would be the chapter chair, Brian Polpeter is in the back, the chapter secretary, Eugenie Middleton, I see, Bill Blubaugh is one of the chief stewards, and other members of the committee that are in the back there. They listened to their membership. They brought the recommendations of their membership forward, and we were able to come to some conclusions. We're not done in any way, but we've come to some conclusions and did it in a very professional, and I heard it said today by one of the members, it was a lot different this time. Nobody left the room mad. So it was good. So we thank the board for your input, and your employees do a great job, and we have a good contract, we have a good relationship. And can I have another couple minutes of public?
All yours.
I'd like to thank Waterworks right now. You're all going to see real soon some of them have seen it already, but with, I'm going to refer to him as Bill instead of
Thank
Mr.
you.
Stowe.
Thanks, Greg.
Bill, with Bill's help, we were able to coordinate a Toys for Tots. We're one of the major sponsors. We're one of the 5 sponsoring agents, AFSCME Iowa is this year, and Des Moines Waterworks jumped on our bandwagon wholeheartedly to the point where a couple of the employees are going to be in the commercial that we just got released, and they're going to say, we work for Des Moines Waterworks, and what is it you say? Provide excellent drinking water, safe drinking
You're
water.
not putting Brian in that ad, are you?
Yeah, Brian's in that ad, as a matter of fact. Brian
Not trying to
and,
scare children, are we?
Brian and Tom Fontanini are in that ad. So it's, and there's other members, but we want to thank, I want to thank Bill personally for jumping on that bandwagon and allowing us to do that. And anytime we can get help from our employers, some of them flat out refuse to allow, even a collection box. So it was a good thing. And we have Judy Bong back here, who is the coordinator of Toys for Tots for Des Moines Waterworks, and has joined in and really stepped up and done a lot. So these people do more than just come to work and provide water every day.
So,
Yes, Susan.
Mr. Lewis,
Greg,
tell
please.
everyone, because this is being televised,
Greg.
how would they drop their toys off? Would it be right
Oh,
here?
there's collection boxes all around at different places. You'll see them at Polk County. They're here. You can bring it out to AFSCME Iowa Council 61 and drop them off. Just anywhere you see a collection box, a new unwrapped toy. And
So there'll be one right here at Des Moines
there's one
Waterworks.
right here. Judy's got them scattered all over down here.
No, I haven't put them out yet.
She hasn't put them out yet.
3rd of December.
Okay.
Okay, but yeah, they'll be here, so please get it out, and I think the commercial starts on the 1st of December, so.
Great.
And the cooperation that we've seen with, in the last quarter has been greatly appreciated, and
Thank you, Greg. Greg,
and we've seen cooperation from some members of the board before, and we're seeing a lot of it now, and it's greatly appreciated, and you guys have a great bunch of employees that do a fantastic job, regardless.
let me just underscore that we've got great employees under great union leadership. This is, that's
You're
true.
talking
That-
about, you're
that's-
talking about Danny Holman now, right?
I'm also talking about Greg Lewis and the committee back here. I want to recognize the management committee that was involved in negotiations, certainly Ron Smith. Thanks, Greg. Ron Smith, Amy Kaler, and Michelle Holland. I don't see Michelle. Oh, there you are. Hello, Michelle. They represented the Des Moines Waterworks management, but at the end of the day, everybody came together with the recommendation before you for approval in item D. We're very pleased by our relationship with AFSCME, and you see the kind of great things that they do for the community through the Toys for Tots. So we're very pleased about working with them in this setting, but their leadership in our community generally. We're very, very pleased by our relationship with the AFSCME Council.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
So moved. And second.
Any more discussion?
I just want to say I'm pleased with this. Mostly I'm pleased when AFSCME and management can stand up here together and say this was a good process and nobody got mad, and I mean, that's the way it's supposed to work. I said when I came on this board, I know Bill and I had discussions when he joined Waterworks. One of the things that pleases me about Waterworks, and disappointed me, frankly, but what pleased me was the opportunity. We have a great opportunity here with Waterworks to be an example of how employees work with an organization to make things better and to present a good product and a good service to our customers. And we've done that. We've had great employees and we do that. And we had these stumbling blocks over time with the way we worked with each other, sometimes with the way the union and Waterworks work together. I hope we're in a phase now where those things are behind us. And it seems to me this negotiation is a first step in that things happened the way they were supposed to. People worked together, they were honest, they were, they fought for the things they needed to fight for, but at the end of the day, there was no grumbling about bad communications or anything like that, and that's a huge step forward, and as a board member, makes me proud to be a board member. It makes my job real easy. So I thank everybody that was involved in this. You know, beyond the fact that I think the contract makes sense from my standpoint, the process is what I'm most proud of, and everybody that was involved deserves a pat on the back for that. With the next thing is, don't let it stop there. We got a lot of work to do, and I know we're going to do it, and we're going to continue working together and use this as an example to build on it.
Can I add something to Mr. Chairman? Because I look in the back of the room and I see Jeannie and Brian, and I remember sitting at my kitchen table with you when I first came on the board, and you opened up our eyes, and you didn't give up, and you were always respectful, and I appreciate that a great deal. And it's taken a while to get to this point, but I can't help but look at the two of you and think, you know, I appreciate your professionalism and your open communication. And on the other side, I think we assembled a tremendous management team. And, you know, Amy and Michelle and Ron, thank you very much for not walking out of the room angry. I heard a consultant one time say, as soon as you show anger, you know, you might as well just put a big old L on your forehead that you're, you know, showing what you're all about. So thank you very much to both sides, and it's going to be a pleasure to vote this one in.
I'm really excited that you've got a 3-year agreement here, and it sounds from when I'm talking with employees, things are going in the right direction. I'm very proud of the management team as well. This is great news.
Thank you, Leslie. Like everybody agrees, I don't need to say anything else. Let's have a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item E, 2013 CPS compensation plan.
And with your approval of item 3D, that is our agreement with the AFSCME Council, the confidential professional and supervisory compensation plan being tied to the hourly changes that were just approved, we look at a 2.5% shift in our salary ranges for the 2013 compensation plan for non-represented employees, as well as a similar increase in insurance contributions to mirror that was negotiated with AFSCME Council 61.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item F, revised CDL drug and alcohol testing procedures.
The resolution before you really is a corrective change in our policy that's intended to align with federal requirements for commercial driver's licenses. It essentially involves additional testing in the event a certain threshold of severity is met in accidents. I understand that we have had discussions with AFSCME as to the need for this change, and again, it's simply to align Waterworks' procedure with federal requirements under the commercial driver's license DOT specifications.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. The proposed, item G, the proposed 2013 schedule for Board of Waterworks Trustees meetings and committee meetings. I guess I propose that we keep our board meeting like we have and tentatively schedule our planning meeting the first Tuesday and the Finance Committee the second Tuesday, and adjust as we need to.
There's no changes here. This is the schedule that's been followed.
The one we've been
Right.
following.
That's fine with me.
Do I have your motion?
So
I'd like
moved.
to do a motion.
Second?
More discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item H, establish nominated committee for the board offices for 2013. Jim isn't here today, but he has volunteered to give everybody a call and work on a slate for our December meeting. If that's okay with everybody, we'll let Jim
I'd
do
be
it.
happy to work with him, I
Okay.
mean, with him not being here, if you would like, and put something together and get it back to the board.
Sounds fine with me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Jim
fine.
and Sue, okay.
Okay. I don't know if we need to vote on that or not.
I don't think we need to vote, do you?
Uh,
As long as it's
For the sense of closure, just for
Says
my
there's a-
benefit, if you would, if
Form a
it would
committee.
be moved and approved, I think it would be helpful.
Do I hear a motion? Sue?
I make the motion, Jim and Sue work together as the nominating committee.
Can I ask for a little direction on that? And to have a slate of officers back at the December meeting, prior to the December meeting, if you could give us a time frame on that, I think it'd be helpful.
Certainly from my perspective, from staff's perspective, I think it would be helpful. I believe your next scheduled meeting is December 18th.
Correct.
If by December 10th, the nominating committee could come back to us with specific recommendations so that we can include it in board materials, I think that would be helpful.
That
Sounds
makes sense.
fine. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion
Just a
passes.
second on that. I'll second it.
Okay, item I, Botanical Center, termination of the 28E agreement. Bill, do you want to, or?
I'd be happy to. Rick Mom has worked in careful coordination with the City of Des Moines Legal Department for this formality that essentially terminates our operation of the Botanical Center. As each of you know, and Graham being especially well informed on this, we do have an agreement with the foundation, the not-for-profit successor that will operate the Botanical Gardens as to our continued, that is Waterworks' continued involvement. But the action today would essentially terminate our agreement with the City of Des Moines for management of the Botanical Center effective 12/31 of this year. Rick, you are certainly the tactician on this. Anything else you want to add?
That's certainly it. We have a 28E agreement. The City Council has this on our agenda for this week, I believe also, and upon its approval, and assuming everything gets completed, so there's the new lease, that will make the 28E obsolete, and therefore we're terminating it. And this termination will also affect the termination of the 28E that governed the relationship with the Friends, as it was then called. So this clears the deck, creates the new regime legally. And this form has been prepared by City Legal and approved by me.
I did fail to mention, and I apologize for this, when you approved the labor agreement with the AFSCME Council, one provision in that essentially provided protections for 1 year for the 3 employees from the Botanical Center who will move back. There are actually more than 3 employees, but 3 who will be moving back and would suffer a wage loss for the first year under the negotiated agreement. They'll be protected from wage loss. But all other elements involving our termination of management for the Botanical Center have really moved very much in schedule and in sync with the Botanical Gardens management. And my thanks to Rick for working with Des Moines Legal on this issue of terminating the existing 28E between the parties.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item J, home service line maintenance agreement.
I would be happy to talk about this at length, but I know my colleague, Mr. Corrigan, has been involved in a labor of love on this item, so I'm confident that
That's
he
one
would.
way to phrase it.
Yeah, I'm confident he'd like to summarize where we are with this.
Labor of love.
Wonder about your priorities.
Yes. I'm handing out a copy of what we are considering a near complete draft of the agreement. At a recent board meeting, the board authorized staff to negotiate an agreement with HomeServe as our preferred provider for service line maintenance, water service line maintenance coverage to all the total service customers within the Des Moines system. And we have worked very diligently and productively with HomeServe on this agreement since then. And as recently as Saturday, we got this draft back from HomeServe. I reviewed it and printed it out yesterday. Rick has had a chance to look at it as well, covering the specifics of the program in terms of who is eligible, how they're eligible, what coverage specifically is being provided, which, as you know, we feel is a much better level of coverage than the general sort of run-of-the-mill coverage that's offered through the mail when companies come to town. The pricing, which we've already talked about in the past, state and federal compliance, the structure of how HomeServe is providing the coverage through their insurance company and them as the agent, and all of that is all outlined. Specifics on the marketing, how the program will be marketing, what involvement we will have, and what authorities we will have throughout the marketing process, billing, insurance coverage. I think it's a fairly complete agreement.
Ted, could you, for people that are watching this, let them know the benefit to them? Because we've been working on this for a long time, staff a lot longer, to let people know what this would provide for them.
Absolutely. This coverage is intended to provide protection to repair or replace water service lines if they begin to leak or are no longer functional for any reason. We've been considering this for a long time because we deal with about 1,000 customers, or as many as 1,000 customers annually, who have an issue either with their stop box, which controls the flow of water to their house, or an actual leak on their service line that they're responsible to repair. A lot of times the customers in the Des Moines service area are not aware that they are actually responsible for operation and maintenance of their service line all the way to the water main, even if the water main is on the other side of the street, including all of that portion that's under the street. It comes as a tremendous shock to them when they discover that not only is it leaking and there's going to be the inconvenience of an outage and a repair, but they're financially responsible for that. We were looking for a way to provide them an option in terms of covering those expenses. There are companies that offer this kind of coverage, and they offer it direct to the customer without cooperating necessarily with the utility, but typically that coverage does not cover the section of the water main from the stop box to the water main, and it does not cover the stop box. We have worked with HomeServe to provide complete coverage for that entire service line, all the way from the point of connection on the water main into the home to the meter, as required by our policy, I guess, in terms of ownership of the service line. So a much better coverage than they could have gotten on their own.
And Ted, if someone would have a problem between their stop box and their home with the pipe, you said there are 1,000 customers annually. That range would be what kind of, because I know Graham shared with us at a finance meeting that it happened to him, and they had to dig up the yard and replace the pipe. What kind of dollars are we talking about? Again, for the folks that are watching this that are going, what is this HomeServe?
Well, there are two categories of repairs that we see most often. First of all, the stop box, or the valve that's used to control the flow of water. A repair to the stop box can cost anywhere from $600 to about $1,200, depending on exactly what's wrong, if there's any concrete involved in terms of a sidewalk or a driveway. So $600 to $1,200, $1,500, something like that, dollars. If the service line is leaking and it cannot be repaired, and the service line has to be replaced in its entirety, we're talking on the low end $5,000, on the high end $10,000. We've seen individual repairs cost as much as $15,000. That's unusual, but that's kind of the range, $5,000 to $10,000.
And the protection offered would be at what rate?
The protection offered would start for the first year at $399 per month, and then there's a 5-year price schedule in here which ends up at $499 per month in the 5th year.
And by your approval, let me make it clear, what you're approving today is basically a delegation back to staff to complete the negotiations. There are some technical corrections that Rick and Ted and Amy Kaler are continuing to focus on. You are giving staff the approval to finalize that and to enter into the agreement. I do want to make clear that for this agreement and for the ability to offer directly through us to our customers this option, and it is an option, the waterworks will essentially receive 5% return for our administrative expenses, including billing and collection associated with this. But I do want to make clear that this is entirely a voluntary solicitation for customers. For some customers, it may make perfect sense. For many, it will not. But Ted and Amy and others have worked very carefully to maximize the protection available through this solicitation to include things that probably normally would not have been included. And for that, just want to commend the amount of work that Rick and Amy and Ted have put into this. This has been, I said facetiously, a labor of love. It's certainly been a labor. It's, a lot of hours have been spent on this.
Is that 5%, I mean, does that cover a real cost that we're incurring because of this program, or is this an incentive that's provided by this company to us?
There are certainly real costs. I'm not sure that I fully appreciate the question, Graham, but do we have real costs associated with this? We do.
But it's probably less than the 5%. It's probably less than what the revenue we're going to get in, we know that.
Arguably, I would say that the costs are probably greater than the 5%.
Okay.
At best, this may make us whole. I want to be clear to you in our recommendation as staff that we are doing this not for some $10,000 of revenue. Our costs are probably in exceedance of that. We believe that this is an option that some customers may want to take advantage of. And for those who do and have a failure, obviously it provides a significant level of protection they wouldn't otherwise have. But this is not a moneymaker from Waterworks' perspective.
That was my roundabout way of making this, of asking that question. I want our customers to realize this is not a business venture on our part. We haven't entered into this to make money. And that 5% could mislead people to think that this is some sort of partnership we formed to do that. In addition, I know in a budget that's the size of ours, that $100,000 that we're getting is not a big deal in our budget. But I mentioned this when we first met with these guys, it would make sense for me if we took that $100,000 and put it toward one of those programs that we already support, you know, the payment of bills for people that can't pay their bills or whatever, I don't know what we call that program. The H2O program, or something. We take that $100,000 and put it in that program. I realize it's really kind of a small thing, and that's a budget of ours, but I want to be clear that the people understand we're not doing this to make money. We're doing this to protect our customers because we believe it's in their best interest to have this covered.
And for our listeners' benefits and for those who are listening to this conversation in the room, I used a $10,000 figure using a $100,000 figure. Let me sort through that. The money that we will receive from HomeServe, a portion of it is focused on individual sales, and that's roughly $10,000 by our estimate each year. The $100,000 that Graham refers to as a one-time payment of $100,000 essentially for us entering into and executing the agreement that allows this to begin. Want to make clear from my vantage at least that we believe at best that's recouping costs for both the $100,000 and the estimated $10,000, but that's why I'm talking about $10,000, he's talking about $100,000. They're actually two different provisions of the agreement.
That's fine. I mean, there's no need to go through the machination that I suggest that we put this into the H2O program, as long as we are clear and people understand why this money is coming to us and where it goes, and to recoup costs is good enough.
I'm very excited that we're going to be able to, enter into this agreement with the company and provide this to the customers. In my business as a landlord, I've paid for a lot of water lines, and this wouldn't help me as a landlord, but I mean, when your water line goes, you get a letter, you gotta fix it immediately. So you have to come up with a large sum of money, and it's difficult sometimes. I think this will be a great thing to offer. And again, it's voluntary. If they choose to do it, it's gives you a big peace of mind.
Ted,
Mhm.
as I look at the marketing, I'm just curious, I know that they can contact them for mailings, et cetera, but if someone calls one of Amy's centers, and they say, hey, I want to, will you add this to the bill, or for those online customers that we're trying to push everybody to online payment, will they get some kind of electronic notice saying, hey, we now have this service, so it's apparent that it's coming out from us?
Yes, is the short answer to
Okay.
that. Amy can give you more details, but we have a kind of a broad spectrum marketing plan.
Mhm.
We're going to use our H2O line that goes out in the bill. We're going to have articles on the blog, articles on the website. HomeServe will be sending mailings directly. There's talk about a postcard mailing going out in advance, telling people it's here, it's coming, look for the opportunity in your mail, here's where you can go on a website, here's a phone number you can call, you can just fill out the paperwork and send it back. We're going to give them every option to opt in to the program, because they will have to opt in. It's voluntary, it's something they'll have to choose to do, but we're going to give them all manner of options to get in.
Will it be on the bill that it says $3.99 insurance for one? So it's going to be real simple.
It's going to be a line item on the bill that shows that that's what they're paying for and that's how much.
Perfect.
Yeah.
What I would hate is for someone to say, well, I didn't understand what this was. You mean you've had this insurance available? So the way you explained it to us, as simply as you did there, that's exactly what I hope, and I'm sure Amy will make sure we communicate in our marketing.
Do you think there are many customers that have other insurance that doesn't cover what ours covers?
We know there are a few. Some of them actually have home service coverage that they offered in advance, and they're all going to be rolled into this coverage. I'm not aware of other companies that are offering this same kind of coverage. There may be people who have purchased coverage in other places. We just don't have any way of knowing that.
So it would be a big issue to notify them to compare.
They'll certainly be aware that this coverage is available, and they'll, depending on the requirements of their coverage, they'll have the option of dropping theirs and switching to this one. But we don't know.
To make clear, Ted, just for my benefit, since I was not involved in the RFP process here, we did have, besides HomeServe, we had American and Utility Service Partners as respondents to our request for proposals.
That's correct.
So clearly there are other people who offer the product. How many of our customers are reliant on another insurer? I really don't have that information.
And remind me, the termination terms, this is a 3-year contract. If we're dissatisfied in that 3 years, what happens?
Well, with notice, we can terminate. We can terminate for any reason we want. There's some implication related to the $100,000 if we terminate without cause. If we terminate for cause, it's spelled out in the agreement. We send them a letter, and the agreement is over. And Rick, do you have any comments?
Within that 3-year period.
Within that 3-year period. At the end of the 3-year period, there's an option to extend for additional 1-year periods twice after the 3 years. So we're kind of looking at a 3-year period with 2 years of option. And then after that, we'll decide. It hasn't been established what we will do.
That's fine. I just want to make sure there was an escape clause, and it sounds like there is.
For us, there is. For the customers, it's much easier. All they
Right.
have to do is say, I don't
I'm
want it
done.
anymore, and they're done.
Right.
We can give 90 days notice, otherwise it rolls over, and we can terminate for cause.
That's great.
To make clear, and I've certainly made comment to our staff that I've not been involved in this process. The process may have been a little bit different had I been involved for some experiences that I've had in the sewer part of the business, which is similar to this in terms of failure and expense. But we're entering into this with the idea that it provides an option and a benefit to customers who would choose it. We certainly would continue to respect the term of the agreement absent a reason that would cause us to believe that performance had somehow failed and that our customers were not getting the benefit of this bargain, if you will.
Right.
But our intention in entering into it is that this is a 3-year agreement with
I get
Ulster.
that. I get that.
When will customers first be able to opt in on this?
The 4th of March is the go-live date that we've tentatively selected. I think that's pretty firm at this point.
And if a customer sells a property, they are no longer responsible?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Is it a month-to-month for the customer?
It is month to month.
Month-to-month, so if they sell the property or if
A
somebody...
new owner.
Yeah. The
So
new
they
owner.
know.
Account.
Yeah.
Whenever the property changes hands, there's a new water account,
Right,
so there'd have to be a new signing up for the coverage.
great.
Yeah. So they can take the coverage with them to their new property. They'll have to sign up again at the new property. But it's month to month.
Excellent.
I guess probably should ask for a motion.
Do we not have?
So moved.
Second?
Any public comment? Sorry.
Any more comment at all? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Item K, authorization of the steering committee and a liaison for master planning of Des Moines Waterworks Park.
Just a brief comment. I know both Leslie and David attended the steering committee meeting that is looking at the master planning process for park improvements, the so-called parkitecture plan. One of the elements that came out of discussion with kind of an informal steering committee that is out there was a request for some expression of support on behalf of the board, hence the item in front of you today, to keep the process moving forward. I was very pleased as a participant in those discussions about the amount of support we are hearing from the public and from some members of the public who, frankly, we are looking to for funding assistance in moving this forward. But one of the requests that they had of us, that is of staff, was to come back to you with a specific resolution of support. And in that, I have offered myself as the liaison, if you will, between the board and the steering committee on direction and movement towards master plan to move park improvements around the parkitecture theory forward.
But anything would come back from the steering committee to this board?
Anything, I want to be precise in answering that, Sue. I wouldn't say anything. I would say anything that involves park improvement, capital improvement, expense, if you will, and it'll be my responsibility to report back to you on a regular basis. But certainly if it involves a change in the park facility, whether it's fully funded by a not-for-profit or not, I will be bringing that back to you. So essentially, anything substantive that involves change in the park will be coming back to you through me.
The only point I want to bring up is I attended the Southwestern Hills Neighborhood Association, and there was a gentleman there from RDG, and he was certainly presenting as if he was with Waterworks. And so finally at the end I said to him, could you please clarify who you were with? Because, I mean, had it been Ted, I'd be fine with that. But he was making some statements about being on the Waterworks staff, and a couple people said, so do you see Bill? Yes, I see. So it was confusing, which is why I'm asking this question. I think we want to be very careful who's out there saying they are with Waterworks and have approval.
I appreciate that. We'll have a discussion with RDG about being very clear that they are acting as consultants to us at this point, but they certainly aren't representing us. Sue, I very much, as a Southsider like you, appreciate the sensitivities because of alignment issues, including the Southwest Connector and neighborhood-related issues that may trigger. We want to be careful that we're not overstating our case, nor becoming, frankly, enmeshed in that issue that's very, very neighborhood sensitive to those of us who live in this neighborhood about the alignment and its relationship with park planning.
think there's a big difference between someone who is a architect and designer standing up and saying what they want to do versus if it's Ted or you
I appreciate it.
or, and it was very muddy, and there were many
We'll have that
opportunities
discussion.
for
Thank
him
you
to
for that.
clarify.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
he did
thanks
not.
for that feedback. We'll have a discussion.
Purely circumstantial, I have discussions in a couple of meetings with people that, Tom Urban related with Botanical Gardens, some folks at the Greater Des Moines Community Foundation, and then I had another long discussion with Doug Reichart on or about the day that this meeting occurred. I don't remember exactly where. And my takeaway from all those meetings is there's real interest in this, and there's some enthusiasm about how to do it. And my conversation with Doug Reichart is one that I want us all to kind of follow up on in some way, and I guess when I say all, I'll turn it over to Bill to do it, but to pursue. He has some interesting ideas about, potential structures, about how this, could move forward, which were interesting to me and things that I hadn't thought of. But what that confirms in me is that people like Doug Reichart are interested and enthusiastic and have some ideas about how to do this. So, yeah, I think it's, and I don't have any preconceived. I've expressed before my concerns about how we, from a waterworks standpoint, go forward with that. But the main thing is that we allow smart people to pursue these ideas, and that's what the purpose of this is.
And if I may, Graham, just to comment on that for a minute, for those of us who are not as directly involved, Doug Reichart, Connie Weimer, Janice Ruan, and Johnny Danos have been very involved in the steering committee, acting as leaders in private fundraising. We hope to pursue this, and Doug is certainly one of the four folks who've been very much involved in this. Some discussion that both Leslie and David were involved in about potential corporate sponsorships as an example, and some really very creative ways to look at how to fund this understandably multi-million-dollar investment in park improvement. One issue that was clear at the steering committee level that I want to bring forward also is in these kinds of issues, whether it's the Botanical Gardens or this kind of project, there is a large capital investment, and then there is an ongoing operating and maintenance expense. And certainly, often we focus on the large capital investment and private contribution to that, and forget the ongoing and often expensive operation and maintenance of whatever the initial investment was. I view it as my responsibility to report back to you on all of those kinds of issues as they become real. Right now, they're pretty conceptual, but I appreciate we want a process that's supports the community and leads the community, particularly in this wonderful park that we work in and many of us live around, but we also have to be respectful of the implications it can have on ratepayers. So I understand my charter from you is to keep an eye on each of those issues, and I really want to thank Ted for his leadership. This is a project he's been working on for a significant period of time, and he has kept those four private parties in particular very engaged in this process, and I think to the benefit of our entire park system, and I very much appreciate the steering committee's involvement. I will continue to report back to you as material issues happen.
That's great. I mean, we all know this, there's real money involved here. I mean, the Botanical Gardens that have raised a lot of money, it's not done raising money for the very reasons you just talked about. They're thinking about how they're going to sustain that thing into the future. So they're going to continue to be in this fundraising market for another $3 or $4 million in the next little while, which makes sense. It's a long process, but you've got a good group there, and good luck.
Do I hear a motion now?
We have one, didn't we?
We did.
It was the second time we did it. All right, so moved.
Second?
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. I'd like to, maybe this is the place I could insert something. It's changed over the years. Sue probably remembers our evaluation of our CEO.
Yes.
And Jim and I talked a little bit, and it didn't seem real appropriate this year to do it the same way we had done it the last couple of times. And we actually sat down with Bill and talked a little bit. We wrote up like 6 we call them matrix. And what I'm thinking is, maybe think about, special things you'd like to see Bill accomplish or the Waterworks accomplish next year. And maybe in December, we could have a planning meeting and bring them all up and give a little something. Bill isn't worked very hard, so we need to add more to it. But, you know, things that you feel important, and the board can get together and give it to Bill, and we'll
Flesh out a little
massage
bit,
it.
specifically goals that you think are important for Waterworks to accomplish in calendar year 2013. Obviously, I've been here some 65 days or whatever it's been. I realize you're not at a point to evaluate me with any real data at this point, but you certainly want to have metrics out there for this organization to reach to in 2013. And I think that's really what David's asking
Yeah.
for.
And are you going to provide a similar document? I mean, I'd like to hear from you as well, as opposed to you just getting information from us about what our goals
Well,
are.
that's what Bill did with us.
Oh, you've done that.
David and I have coordinated
Great.
what I view as some issues that I think are going to be very
Great.
important in 2013. As an example, I'll use as an example a safety metric to improve the safety of our employees. Those are the kinds of things that I've suggested, and certainly, obviously, I work for you, not the other way around. I can certainly put out some markers that I think are important to me based on my less than 70-day tenure here, but ultimately how we shape them and what direction you want to give me, obviously I'm going to be very receptive to, but we've had an opportunity to kind of fashion a few, like safety as an example, for 2013, and I think it's important as I go into discussions with the senior staff that the organization have a real sense of what your expectations are, not just of me, but of us. And I'm happy to shape those and be involved in that, and would be delighted to be able to have a further discussion of that in December with you in this kind of forum.
And Jim and I threw up, since we're both planners, we threw up about, alternate water supplies when the river runs dry. Just different things like that.
Mhm. If you could share the information that
Yeah,
Bill,
before.
so that we can, I mean, there may be tactical items under some of those bucketed items, but then we could have that to you by your planning meeting.
Yeah. Does everybody think that's maybe okay to
Great
pursue?
idea.
Sure,
Great
yeah, I
idea.
think it's a good idea.
Okay, let's see where we were. Okay, the committee reports. Since Jim isn't here, let's let Jim do that when he's here in December. There wasn't anything that's real pressing, the planning committee meeting. And should we just go on to the finance committee meeting?
I think we have already covered everything. We have the budget, we have the rates, and I'm looking for minutes here, but
As an example, Sue, also some tentatives on the labor agreement and compensation plan that you've approved, all of which is to say the items on your agenda today that appropriately would have been finance and audit related have gone through that process for your consideration.
we, on the COLA, on the cost of living adjustment, we did have a lengthy discussion on that, and
The retiree.
Correct.
And that'll be coming to you here in a few minutes under the trustees for the pension plan discussion,
So-
item 4 to be precise.
definitely something that we will discuss as we go into that meeting.
And I think probably on item B, the Botanical Center, Graham, we probably.
I don't have much to report. I know Bill's continuing to work on, the turning everything over, so I don't think there's anything new there to report. I think you and I are supposed to still have a meeting with them, but we haven't scheduled that yet.
You may want to flesh out a little bit the outstanding issue there, Graham. from your
Yeah, and we've
bench.
talked about it before. I had a concern, and some of you share that concern, that there's a somewhat open-ended issue about the amount of water that we would provide to the Botanical Garden. And I didn't want us to have some sort of thing that down the road is going to get us into a problem where we're providing huge amounts of water. I mean, and remember, that's going to be an outdoor garden, which will require substantial amounts of water over time. And I just think it makes sense, not only from our interest, but also from Botanical Garden interest, that that's pretty clear about what that means, how much water we're talking about, so that nobody gets caught short. We haven't resolved that yet.
We've not, and if I may, just to expound on this issue for a minute, I am very suspect of free water provisions and agreements that we will enter into in the future. I am not someone who is supportive of that. I think it says to the employees who are out here and to our customers that we are producing and distributing an invaluable, valueless product. That is not the case.
And there's no incentive to conserve. If somebody's getting a
It very
free-
much distorts the use, in my experience, and coming from being the beneficiary, if you will, of free water as a former city senior manager. I can tell you that when it is without value, without cost to the consumer, it's misused. So I have very strong views that in the future, we're going to, at least from a staff's perspective and talking with you, view that very suspectly. And this is a situation that Graham has accurately described. The provision is probably more than fairly open-ended. It's open-ended on consumption. And from a staff's perspective, we have a great concern about what that means. So getting away from free water to consumers who treat it like it's valueless is certainly going to be one of my agenda items in contract discussions with folks who we have a contractual relationship in, and bringing recommendations to you in the future.
And there's not a resistance that I have come across in Botanical Gardens. We just have to, we need to nail this down and.
Just don't forget it. is
And
what
we need
you're
to put a
saying.
real thing on it, because
Mhm.
it's just gonna cause us a problem down the road.
Yeah,
Well, part of their mission was to show how valuable water is. And
Absolutely. And there's supposed to be an educational component over there, and so this all goes hand in hand. But
Mhm.
I think that is the one loose end that's a potential big loose end, and we're gonna follow up on that.
Well, Bill, do you want to finish out the meeting?
Item C under CEO and general manager comments, I just have one. I'm sure each of you have been following, whether through it's the Des Moines Register or other video media, the situation at the Elliott Apartments on 4th Street in downtown Des Moines. Ted Corrigan, John Lynn's been very involved in this process. You may remember that effective November 1, a number of insurance changes were made. Our general liability policy now falls to One Beacon, who is our carrier for this large claim that we expect from the Elliott Apartments. There are several layers to that. The largest single concern is obviously we had 80 or so residents in those apartments that had to be relocated because they lost essentially all utility services as the basement of that building flooded. Ted, John, Polk County Emergency Management have been very involved in working through a process of making sure that those folks were treated humanely and respectfully, and continue to be relocated until Wednesday or Thursday. I've learned to say, and maybe Friday now at this point, but that's a significant expense, obviously, in our view, to our insurance carrier. As many of you know, there is a restaurant, Fong's Pizza, in that location that has certainly suffered a casualty because of that, both in terms of lost equipment and interrupted business. There'll be a number of legal issues associated with that, but Ted and his team have really focused on getting out there. Our distribution crews have been terrific in responding immediately. We cut water service, repaired the main, have gone through a process and working with the city of Des Moines to make sure that all the utilities have been restored, re-inspected, and something akin to a certificate of occupancy that allows people to move back in will be received. There are structural concerns initially that we are walking through and are satisfied with at this point in working with Jim Nahas, who's the owner of that building, as many of you may know, been very constructive in working with us and been very tolerant, frankly, of a very difficult situation for him, obviously, and his staff as well as his tenants. Ted, who has far deeper experience in this business than I do, obviously, has summarized this as one of the more significant events he has seen. We want to treat it and continue to treat it as a serious event, an opportunity for us to assess our response systems But I have to tell you that from a positive standpoint, we're, again, very pleased by how a number of different folks stepped up. Certainly, first and foremost, our distribution crews that worked very hard to minimize this issue and to restore service. City of Des Moines has been very helpful. Polk County Emergency Management. We're not used to relocating large groups of people. That's not an easy task on a dime, as we had to perform here. There have been a number of partnerships that have come out of this very constructively for us. At the end of the day, no human loss of life, no serious human injury, certainly some inconvenience to a number of folks, for which we apologize, but we'll work it through constructively, and certainly you'll be working very closely with One Beacon on claims associated with this, because they will be significant, as in 6 figures significant.
Right. So they're gonna get them back in this week?
That's our hope. Ted, I don't know if you have anything additional you
Tenants,
want to add
that's
to that.
fast, really, with all the damage.
We are
You may want to step up here, Ted, just so we can have you on the record, as it were.
We're making excellent progress, but as you can imagine, there's a lot to be done. Every single electrical component in that basement that was flooded has to be completely replaced, including the wiring, and all the conduits has to be removed, and the conduits have to be cleaned. The hot water system, some fairly major infrastructure there, but we are hopeful that Thursday we'll be able to move back in, maybe Friday, as you said. But, still,
That's incredible.
yeah,
About the hole in the foundation.
We have contracted with a consultant to provide us a design for infilling those. There are 2 holes in the wall, both of which were originally holes in the wall. One was a door, one was a window. Apparently the street level was several feet lower at one time.
Yeah.
And they are going to give us a structural design for refilling those, and we will have a contractor come and do that for us, and that may be next week. But we can move
But that
people
won't
back
keep them
in.
from being, occupying, that'll be good.
That's right.
And the boiler, they were able to just clean it up and get it going again?
Yes, but it will have to be replaced.
Oh.
There are 2 boilers, and they will have to be replaced. Anything mechanical that was submerged can be temporarily reinstated, but then it will have to be replaced.
Under building code requirements of the City of Des Moines, the submergence apparently is an issue for complete replacement, even though it can provide temporary service. So, again, we'll be coordinating. I do want to, again, emphasize that Jim Nahas, as the building owner, has been very good to work with in this circumstance. This is, as you can imagine, these are not the kind of issues you foresee as a building owner. Very significant, very traumatic for the tenants as well as the owner. We continue to work through very carefully, and I say we, that's in the royal sense. Ted and John are working through diligently to make sure that this is done in a way that's respectful of the loss and also respectful of our interests in doing what's required and then some, particularly given the dignity of 80 folks who've had to have been suddenly relocated in a way that none of us would wish for ourselves or anybody we know.
I would like to reiterate what you said about the cooperation that we got from Polk County Emergency Management, the City of Des Moines, the ownership and management at the Elliott Apartments. They've been fantastic, incredible patience, great to work with. Our folks who spent most of the night there, not just distribution folks, but also water production folks who responded immediately with pumps and things, and service folks who have been out for various reasons. It's been a real team effort. A lot of people, both internal and external, have been involved, and it's going very well.
I will express one disappointment that I've had, because I find it troubling. Initially, we reached out to Red Cross and were told that this kind of event is not one that qualifies for their relocation assistance. Apparently, a water main break and relocation associated with that does not meet some test that they have for assistance. I say that in some consternation. Fortunately, we live in a county that has deep emergency response capability in Polk County Emergency Response, very helpful to fill that void and direct us.
That is
But
surprising to me.
It was,
I mean, they do so much work for fire, for people who are displaced by fire. I
They
don't see
do. I
how
was
this would be
shocked,
different.
and I'm telling you, those people, you know, are some more
I'm gonna
vulnerable
follow up on that.
residents. They
I've done
need
a lot of
some
work
help.
over there, and they need to reconsider that policy.
and I alert you simply because, again, that kind of consternation on my part, because Ted and I had a discussion about resources and how we could work this through City of Des Moines Community Development, very helpful incidentally in helping to fill that void. But Polk County, again, is a populated county with a lot of resource and a lot of need in some circumstances for emergency response. We're very fortunate that A.J. Mumm and his team were able to help us because, again, we're not in the business of finding immediate housing for 80 people very often and hope not to be in that
No.
business. But they had a very significant assistance that they could provide us that directed us initially to the Holiday Inn here in Des Moines, and then recognizing that probably was not the right architecture, that probably not the right layout for a number of these folks, relocation to the Roadway Inn on Northeast 14th. But frankly, those are not the kind of data points and capabilities that we would have without relying on other folks, and we're very fortunate to have AJ and the City of Des Moines, Phil Delafield in particular, be very helpful to us.
Phil, could you put that in a letter to the Polk County supervisors
I'd be more than happy to do that,
from
Sue,
the
in your
board?
direction.
I think that
Absolutely.
would be
Absolutely.
terrific. to
And if I may,
And to the city-
and if
the
I
city
may, to the
helped
city
also.
council
That
for
would
their
be wonderful.
That'd be
assistance.
good.
And
It's what we're,
well, a couple of other points. Salvation Army did step up and provided food for that group of approximately 80 residents for the first 24 hours. So dinner and then
Wow.
breakfast the next day and lunch. And DART provided the transportation.
Very
So they
nice.
rolled up their buses to the Elliott and loaded them up and took them wherever we needed them to go.
Wow.
So remember that when you see the red kennel
That's right,
around at Christmas time.
absolutely.
I'll say this, I'll make this pledge. I would say once we get this resolved and Fong's is back in business, at the first board meeting, I'll supply the Thai chicken pizza.
Excellent.
Do we get to go down there?
Well, maybe we could have it down there or have it brought here, either way, but
I'll buy the kamikazes.
I've never wanted Thai chicken pizza more than I do now that I can't have it.
That's great.
Popular place.
That's great, Ted.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That's all I had for comments.
Okay, anybody else, any comments before we adjourn?
Yes, that G, item G, could we touch on that?
I'd be happy to, and there are a number of pieces to that. Sue, what you have here is a very general document on some approaches. What I would like, with your permission and tolerance, is to bring Linda to your board meeting in January. Just as we have an extra item here, an update item on water production, I would like her to be able to talk with you about legislative initiatives and your interests in issues that we may have on the Hill. And I think January is probably an appropriate time frame to have that discussion.
Okay, we had, and you would not know about this, we had taken action a few years ago to have a legislative agenda prior to the legislature starting in January. So I mean, this is a great overview of some of the things in the bills that would be going on, but what I'm interested in is what we are taking the lead on, what we're going to, just like the City of Des Moines legislative agenda. And before session starts, we had asked in the past to have a good idea. This is a great forecast, but I'm not seeing what we're taking the lead on, who we're partnered with, for things.
I understand, and that's what I intended to bring to you in January, but if the real point is that's too late,
Well,
we need
I
to do it in
wonder.
December.
I wonder.
And I appreciate that. I have another item scheduled for you for December, but this can be on your regular agenda, and we can try to craft it that way if that's what you prefer. Or if you'd prefer to delegate it back to the planning committee as an example, rather than take up agenda space here, we can handle that either way. So you give me your direction on what you want to do. We can handle it any way that meets your needs.
I think you can put it on the regular agenda, don't you? For our 18th
Wanna put it on the
meeting,
December?
18th meeting, don't you, Sue?
Yeah.
That sounds good.
We'll be happy to do that.
Look, we can discuss that later.
Got it. we'll tentatively put it on the agenda and go from there. But I do appreciate this is not, what we've included here probably does not suit the need that you have overall.
Great.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we'll close the meeting.
Okay.
The meeting's closed. We will open the meeting of the Board of the Waterworks Trustees for the Des Moines Waterworks Pension Plan, November 27th, 2012. It's about 5 minutes till 5. Let's see, item 1, minutes of the November 22nd and September 25th meetings. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 2, the pension audit, the 2011. Do I hear a motion?
I move that we receive and file the 2011 pension plan audit prepared by McGladrey and Pauling.
Any second?
Second.
Any discussion? I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I asked Bill, since he's just new to this, he looked over the performance and everything. I don't know if this is an appropriate time, that he had any comments.
If I can have just 30 seconds, and again, I don't ascribe any expertise in this, but in quickly looking at this, a couple things stood out for me on page 3 of your report. Basically, for the folks who are listening in the audience, there's some $37, almost $38 million in assets to the pension plan. Principal is our administrator for the pension plan. If you'll note on what the return was in calendar year 2011 on that asset, actually about $4,000, a little over $4,000 was lost in market return. That compares with about a $4.5 million gain from the previous year. Obviously, a net loss of $4,000 on a $37 million asset is not a positive development, hence leading to your need to, in the budget process that you've just approved, contribute some $3.2 million, as I recall, to the pension plan. Those are not the kind of sustainable returns that we're going to want to see to be able to keep the pension plan fully funded or funded in a responsible way for you as trustees. Another observation, the final observation I would make really is on page 11 of your report, but essentially talking about what the value of the asset is, some $38 million, what the accrued actuarial liability is, $51 million, and that shortfall obviously is significant, $13 million. So there is certainly a concern about that gap. For those of you who are listening to it, that kind of gap in the state of Illinois would be far, far more significant than it is here or in a large Ohio or Illinois or other CalPERS, that is the state of California. Those gaps are very more significant in terms of actual dollars and gap as a percentage, but certainly we have an interest, we as staff has an interest in providing you greater direction on the pension issues more generally. You will be taking action on a staff recommendation here in a few moments on cost of living for current pensioners under this system, where the staff recommendation is no cost of living adjustment. There are a number of things here that I think that we have an obligation to look at and to provide recommendations. We'll be working and be reporting to you in December about the direction in terms of an outside consultant to help us with this. One of the issues that we talked with the AFSCME Council about is trying to provide some options for our employees, if that can be done, that may encourage those who have lesser service in particular to shift to another plan like IPERS. But there's a lot of detail that needs to be ferreted out to find out whether that really is a meaningful option. But when I look at these numbers as someone who is unconnected with the pension plan, certainly very concerned about the trend, and I recognize from discussions with Peggy and others, market return is key, and certainly the markets in the long term will come back and will provide greater return, but to have a $37 million, almost $38 million asset that provides a negative return in any one year is troublesome to me, and certainly I'm sure to you as trustees for the pension plan, quite troublesome. So we'll continue to provide some mechanisms that will allow you to provide greater protection of these assets and of the plan itself. You've already closed the plan, that is, there are no new enrollees in this plan. When I was hired, you are going to take an action shortly that will end for the 2013 consideration of a cost of living adjustment for current pensioners, but there are other changes that we will want to provide to you and recommendations in the future that are not intended to be drastic and earth-shattering to folks who are interested in this plan, but we want to take actions that are prudent, and certainly these kind of numbers in the short term provide me great concern in advising you on actions as trustees you need to take on behalf of the Waterworks pension plan.
Thank you. Does anybody else have?
Bill, I have a question to follow up on your statement here. So as trustees of this pension plan, who within this utility, or is it turned over solely to principal to make the decision on how that $38 million is invested? Because certainly I think having lost $4,000 after investing $38 million is not what we're seeing in the market for the past 12 months.
And I think certainly for the past 12 months, I want to be clear that the minus $4,000 return was for the calendar year 2011. Ultimately, your question is who's responsible for
Right.
direction of the investments. Principal,
Correct.
as the plan administrator, has that responsibility. There are a number of assumptions that they've made that are also pretty important, Sue, about what the investment rate of return assumption is. They're on page 9 here, but ultimately the question is who directs those investments. It's the principal as our plan administrator, not members of staff.
Any other comments? Let's see. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 3. Now is the time for public comment from employees or anything. Bill, have you had any?
I have not had official comment. Certainly I've talked with a number of employees and particularly through their representatives in AFSCME. The general tone of the concern is what kind of reductions are you going to recommend? My comment back is we're going to do what's reasonable and prudent and respectful of our employees, but recognizing that this is not a Waterworks problem per se. This is a large national problem that really gets down to two very fundamental facts, and that is we all live longer than actuarial assumptions would have had us living just 10 or 15 years ago. And second, the issue, Sue, that you were just questioning, the market in the last several years has been far more difficult to extract returns on than it has been in the past. So less return, longer lives, which means longer payout. We're going to have to make some recommendations to you like that you're hopefully about ready to approve in number 4 that begins to address concerns in the pension plan to make it more reliable for folks in the future.
Okay, I guess if we have no other public comment, we'll go to item 4, 2013 pension cost of living adjustment, COLA provision. Do I hear any motions?
This was discussed extensively in our finance meeting, and it was a recommendation of staff that complete agreement that we are not able to or willing to fund a 2013 cost of living adjustment. And that came from our finance committee, and I think everyone was there. So.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Discussion. I think we've all discussed
Just
it.
kind of had it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And unless anybody has any other business, we'll adjourn here and go on to what other item? We'll close the pension meeting. And then I don't know what you call this, updates?
And again, this is the first of a series that we as staff hope to be able to provide you at the end of your regular meetings that are intended to be informational. Mike McKiernan from our water production staff, our director of water production, has a brief presentation here on what was a record-setting year for us, the year that's closing 2012. Huge water demand, great difficulty in production and meeting that demand. We were always successful in being able to meet that. But a great deal of work on behalf of Mike and his staff to produce water at the quantities demanded by our customers. All yours, Michael.
Okay, thanks for the few minutes here. There's been rightfully a lot of discussion this year about the pumpage, but a lot of those messages have been small and directed to maybe some narrower audiences. And so recently there was an effort to just kind of try and put all things on one sheet of paper that attempted to summarize a few things. And so my goal here in the next few minutes is just to really walk you through this sheet of paper that I've laid in front of you. And then we will conclude with how that might impact some monetary things in 2013. So upper left part of this sheet is just the pumpage data, monthly pumpage data back to 1988. And we saw things early this year in May. We had nearly 1,700 million gallons in May of 2012, which was a record May. We made a comment about that. Didn't think a whole lot about that. June followed just shy of 2,000 million, which was the second largest June on record, at least back to 1988. And generally what we see is things kind of ramp up, and then ultimately you get some precipitation, you get some relief. That did not arrive, and you will see the July number there of over 2,500 million, which is the largest month we've ever seen. So you look at that, look at those numbers.
Just to be clear, and Mike's vocabulary as an electrical engineer is a little bit different than mine, but 2,500 million would be somewhat similar to 2.5 billion gallons. I just wanted to make that clear.
The powers of 10 are here.
Powers of 10.
Yeah, we usually just count millions of gallons, and but when they start ratcheting up into the thousands, we can change the expression there. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to show at the bottom right of that table is that through October we were just shy of 16 billion for the year. Looked at some November numbers already, and we're headed for 18 billion for 2012, which again is new territory. Upper right part of the page there, whenever the customer demand gets above 70 or 75, we just try and track the record days, if you will. And there's some rather interesting data here. We just plucked out the top 15 days on the record. 11 of those 15 days happened in 2012.
Wow.
There was one day early in July, the 4th. That number is somewhat inflated by some main breaks that occurred that day. But the remaining 10 days that are in the top 15 are also sequential. So these days happen one right after the other. And so those create what I call, or other people call, if I'm going to properly quote here, those are step lively moments in the production department. So we'll get to the golfer later, but below the golfer there are some ASR statistics, and showing how much we injected, how much was able to be recovered in this production cycle of 2012. We have excellent numbers there. The key thing to point out there is that some strong effort was required to get the LP Moon ASR site functional. We had a cable failure there that we found in the first quarter, and some emergent time-sensitive efforts were necessary to get that facility back online in time for our peak season. So Kudos to all involved with that. That's all the positive news right there. There are challenges that come with the high demand. I think I was before you in July to explain that when our demand goes up, our ratio of river to gallery water also changes. We generally use more river than gallery during peak demands. And when we're in a drought, that ratio goes up even higher because the gallery yield at Fluor Drive and the groundwater sources even at McMullen plant are diminished under the low river stage. So where I'm going with that is just an awareness on all of our part that the one struggle here was controlling disinfection byproducts. We had a few locations in our system. There are some suburban accounts that also had disinfection byproduct levels above the prescribed level in Q3. There are some new rules involving those disinfection byproducts, tighter constraints, and new calculation method. We're hoping to see that basically subside with just continued operations here, but the stuff in the lower left is kind of an explanation of how we got there. But I think it also tells us some things that we need to be doing as we move forward. Are there things that we could have done differently this year to enhance our treatment operation here at Fluor? Again, great efforts were exhausted, but I think we have the service here to provide a self-critique. What can we do differently? And there are some ideas there that the lab is working on, some opportunities we may be able to pursue. There are other things we learned operationally just about how best to let these kind of flows travel through the system, and there are improvements that are underway that are looking out for those future scenarios. So thankful to report that. I guess the last thing I've got is just the lower right. I call those the not so fine print notes. I mentioned that there were clearly some step lively moments for the production department. But secondly, like I said, we will continue to look for, we includes all of us, continue to look for ways to get more from our facilities. That's why we're here. And the more passionate message here from myself today is that none of this was an inspired event. This was a function of the efforts of all at the utility. And I'm not talking about the days and weeks before this. I'm talking about the weeks, months, years, possibly decades that allowed this to happen. So I would be more than happy to answer any questions you might have on the data in front of you.
How do you feel about it hitting 18 billion projected in 2012?
It is what it is. There's a little bit of satisfaction, I guess, that comes with maybe tipping that number over a little bit. I think our goal, and I've mentioned this to Bill, is to try and, we want volumes for sure, but if we can just smooth those out, that would be nice.
I just want to add, and I did a poor job of appropriately recognizing the Elliott context, that it's more than distribution. It's service and its production. In this situation, certainly production, our water production staff takes the lead, but the service and distribution folks pushing this water into the system and appropriately billing for it are very important. Great effort here. Not an effort, frankly, that's sustainable for us year after year after year, at least not easily sustainable, but Mike talked about the longevity of work that goes into these kind of critical path timeframes. A lot of that also involves this board's work and prior board's work and investment in the system. These are not easy events. They are crisis events in many, many ways. They're crisis to us as we produce and distribute and bill for it to our customers, many of whom just take for granted that they're going to have as much water as they want in these kind of extraordinarily hot and high demand days. But it takes a lot of work from a lot of different people in this organization, and really back to our discussion on the labor agreements and the salary plan, recognizing the difficulty of these events and our need to learn from them and improve our system, which we're committed to doing, is very important. But a lot of hours, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears goes into meeting these kinds of numbers. These are extraordinary numbers, and the leadership that we have, not only from the directors, but from the rank and file folks, and stepping up and working long hours and keeping the system going. Mike mentioned the week of July 4th, where we had significant numbers of main breaks. Incidentally, those kind of main breaks, unfortunately, we're seeing to some degree today for other reasons. There's a lot of work in this organization to keep this system operational and to provide at demand, at instant demand, the needs of our customers. Particularly difficult with this kind of summer and the river conditions that did not easily support water production. So my thanks as a newcomer to this organization for all the people who are involved in that, and certainly Mike in production leading that, but every element of this organization recognized and contributed to the achievements here. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
There's an additional piece to this that I wanted Peggy to talk about. Certainly when we exceed what we would expect for sales, there are revenue implications at that time. That is for this fiscal year or this calendar year in our budget cycle of 2012. But there are also consequences for those of our wholesale customers who have exceeded the terms of their purchase capacity agreement. There's an immediate revenue recognition that we will see this year, but next year there are consequences for a number of communities who, because of their demand, exceeded their purchase capacity agreement and essentially pay a surplus charge for that year, that is for calendar year 2013, because of that. So Peggy has some numbers associated with both those revenue points from 2012 as well as what we'll see in 2013.
Yes, the upside of the record pumpage is that, the finance staff has been sitting back there in the corner of the first floor counting little stacks of money. As Mike...
That's little stacks of money for those of you in the back
Yeah.
that maybe want to kind of record that.
As Mike said, through October, pumpage has been 16 million gallons. I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb, Mike. If we assume that November and December pumpage meets the budgeted number, and there's no reason to assume it won't, I would say that we will be at 18.4. Going out on a limb, I rarely make...
You never do that. You
I
always
don't.
go into crystal ball.
I'm feeling pretty good about this one. So that means that we will exceed the budgeted pumpage number by about 1.6 million gallons. Sorry, 1.6 billion gallons. Mike trips me up also in switching back and forth between millions and billions, or about 10%. As we've talked about before in here, that's the pumpage number. We don't necessarily bill for everything that we pump. We have a number of reasons that there's a difference between that number. But when we look at the billed consumption numbers, those also exceed the budget by about 10%. So they are correlating very nicely. And almost all of that sales has been in the wholesale class, which is not surprising. Those are the customers that are using more variances in their consumption. Again, we all, I think, recognize that most of this water was probably for irrigation, and the class of customers that irrigate most heavily are our wholesale customers. We've seen that in the past. Their peak to average ratios are higher than that within the Des Moines system, so not surprising at all. That translates roughly, and this is a little harder to get a real handle on, but I would estimate that it's about $2.3 million of additional revenue. There are expenses associated with that, of course. The upside of exceeding the revenue number, or exceeding consumption, is on the revenue side, you have more revenue, but those extra gallons also cost to produce. And primarily the expenses related to that would be the very direct ones like chemicals and power. Certainly, Mike, and he's talked about his folks and all of our staff. We had the same number of people. They may have worked some overtime, so it may have cost a little bit more, but the same number of people produce that water, that amount of water, no matter what it is, whether it's under budget or over budget. So the variable expenses are things like chemicals and power and residuals. There's a lot of lime that has to be used to treat that water. So again, rough estimates on those are about $800,000 or net revenue of about $1.5 million. Harder to quantify, certainly, in those expenses. We talked about a little bit, Mike did today and also previously, was the fact that the increased pumpage did cause more main breaks. A little harder to get a handle on, which of those main breaks might have been caused by that consumption. We know that it happened, but we can't say that these 5 or these 10 or whatever. So a little harder to quantify what the main break costs are attributable to increased consumption are, but we do know they're there. So in round numbers, I would say about $1.5 million of net revenue. I talked with Bill about this, and I think he's in agreement. My recommendation of what to do with that money is basically to put it in our reserves at this point in time, because we have a looming issue of FEMA deobligation and that money that we're facing to possibly have to pay back. So I think that that's the prudent thing to do at this point until we get a resolution on that issue. We are certainly still pursuing that deobligation issue, but until we have a firm resolution on it, it would seem prudent to put this money in reserves.
You want to talk about the implications on purchase capacity of
Yes.
customers for next year?
Yes. Any questions about that? As Bill said, the excess pumpage, not always, but in this year, has some lasting ramifications, and that is several of our wholesale customers who have purchase capacity contracts with us did exceed their allowed amount within their contract, and so that will increase their rate for a one-year period of 2013. Again, a little hard to estimate, because while we know what the impact on their rates will be, we don't know exactly how much any of those customers will buy in 2013. But based on the numbers that we're if you recall, in the 2013 budget, we have a pretty conservative estimate of pumpage, and that is 16.8. So when you translate that into how much of that goes into the wholesale rate class, et cetera, we would estimate the increase in the revenue from those additional rates would be about $500,000. And that has been factored into the 2013 budget.
Let me acknowledge, if I can, Amy Kaler and Tanya Smith have done a lot of the nitty-gritty calculation work and looking at the purchase capacity agreements, the consumption that exceeded those agreements and their consequences. We're still sorting through some communication process with those wholesale customers and some questions that they've raised. But at the end of the day, the $500,000 or so that Peggy's talked about is what we anticipate that will net out to in increased revenues in 2013. A lot of detailed work, certainly an unusual circumstance for a number of these customers who have purchased what has historically been far more capacity than they've needed in this year, seeing that they've exceeded that, and certainly raising some questions for them about that process and how they should accommodate that in the future in terms of potentially additional purchase capacity agreements. But a great deal of work on behalf of a number of folks in this room in that process of quantifying it, coming up with the numbers that Peggy has provided, and then communicating back to those wholesale customers the consequences for exceeding the purchase capacity agreements.
Bill, but you're on to something, because you'll remember a customer that contacted me that you have since then visited with, that they really didn't know what their options were. They said, we are going to be exceeding our capacity, what do we do now? And I think that's been a big question we are all saying we want to sell more water. They're seeing it as we are penalizing them.
Pretty complicated issue to kind of sort through, Sue. You've raised the issue. A number of our wholesale customers have raised it. We want to work that through in a thoughtful way. There are other customers out there that have excess purchase capacity that can be purchased by one of our wholesale customers. And we'll certainly be talking more about that process of communicating options, as an example, to wholesale customers that exceed their purchase capacity agreement to try and coordinate with those who do not. Ultimately, that becomes a business decision on what makes sense for them. But I want to be clear on purchase capacity generally. In our business, it's very difficult to look at average needs and peak needs and have a system that supports both of those. That's kind of the difficulty that Mike and others have faced. This has been a very unusual year, and we look at a year that, on average, assumes that we're going to sell or produce 16.8 billion gallons of water. We produce arguably 18.4 billion gallons of water. That's a lot of water between what we expect and what we sell. The capital infrastructure issues associated with supporting that, the human resource issues, the staffing issues, the support issues associated with that are based on certain assumptions. And when you exceed a peak, to say, whoops, we really didn't mean to, doesn't help you as board members in directing investment, in directing us on management of those kind of needs. It's a tricky situation, one we want to support our customers, but we want to also recognize that an agreement, a purchase capacity agreement, is exactly that. It is an agreement. And are there circumstances in which agreements can be violated? There are, but there are consequences for doing that. And certainly in the staff sorting through that, we want to be attentive to the overall needs of the utility that have us recognizing that some may argue there's a penalty for exceeding the agreement. In any agreement that I can think of, any consequences of my life when I violated it, there are consequences. And that is a consequence that has a very real and justifiable business grounding for you as board members, and that's if everyone exceeded their purchase capacity agreement, we would not be in a situation where we could produce enough water to be able to meet that demand. And that has serious consequences on the longevity of this utility and our reliability in the community as someone who has never not been able to meet our customer demands. So some significant issues, but the specific question you brought to me, Sue, we have done some reflection internally. I've had some communications with our wholesale customer. There'll be some additional ones. There are options out there, but there are options that frankly always have a price and consequences when those agreements are exceeded.
But also I've been to some of these meetings, and think about it. These people, these different entities, some will double the price. We're selling at wholesale. There's some that maybe mark up 700%. When they have sold all this money up, all this water up to purchase capacity, they've been making 100% more, 700% more. So they have also brought in quite a bit more money last year.
I have a question
so it's a two-sided.
All right.
The purchase capacity, so if someone isn't using all their purchase capacity, we don't have a first right of refusal, or we wouldn't want that, to take that back? Because I heard that one of the suburbs,
And to be clear, and there are other people who are more adept at purchase capacity history than I am, but basically that's setting a cap, that if the cap is exceeded, there are consequences in terms of now paying more than the wholesale rate, and that's what we're talking about.
Right.
But when communities don't reach that cap, clearly that's their objective. They want to come close to that cap, meaning that they've contributed at the right level, but not exceeded. Simply because a community converts, as an example, to full service customer, from a wholesale to a retail customer, and we've had a number of customers that have done that, communities that have done that. We want to encourage more to do that because that's a great thing for this utility. That
purchase capacity that's no longer really necessary, how that's brokered, we also want to make confident that we're giving that community the greatest option on how to market that. Otherwise, if we had the first right of refusal as a utility, it may diminish the market value of that and discourage people from entering into that agreement. So there are lots of market reasons,
okay.
in my view, Leslie, why we wouldn't want to do that. But at the end of the day, the current agreements, and we have two of them, I think, two purchase capacity agreements, don't allow or don't reserve to the waterworks the right to assume that first option. So
Okay.
our argument that if you violate the agreement, there are consequences, the symmetric side of that is we don't impute terms that don't exist. And perhaps in the future, that's one that we should consider. I would have a little bit of a concern because I think it probably has a market. It reduces the value of that purchase capacity for resale.
Right, because taking the purchase capacity back, it doesn't do us any good.
Mhm.
You know, this is not, it's not something that's an asset to us. So other than the first right of refusal, i.e. that we would buy it back, we would just turn around and resell it. And that's exactly what Bill's talking about. It's really more beneficial to that customer who ends up with that excess capacity for them to sell it outright rather than
And
to
not
us.
even bother with
Yeah.
us. Okay.
Getting us in the mix, I would agree, probably just distorts market factors.
Okay.
So,
Rick, we've overstepped our legal bounds.
No,
Rick
not-
is going to
not the
correct us.
slightest. I did want to make an
You may wanna go
observation.
out.
Thanks.
I wanted to make an observation about the character of the purchase capacity agreement and what its objective was, at least in significant part, was to finance the cost of peak capability to serve all of the customers. And the basic idea of purchase capacity is the people who are using that capacity at the peak are going to share in the cost to create the facilities, to honor and to
Okay.
generate that peak.
Okay.
Good point.
Mhm.
Okay, so when you exceed the purchase capacity, or when you buy purchase capacity, you're buying a share of the peak capacity. When you exceed the purchase capacity that you purchased, you're taking more than your share
Right.
versus somebody else who is honoring the limit is taking less than their share. And that is why when this agreement was negotiated, and it was heavily negotiated among the wholesale customers at the time, it was thought necessary that there had to be a check on taking more than your fair share or your purchase share of the capacity. And remember, that's what we're talking about, the peak capacity that has to be built, it has to be paid for, it has to be present in order to produce the 100 million gallons a day when needed.
And it's implicit in Rick's remarks, and I appreciate, Rick, that clarity. It may not be obvious to board members who don't have to review these materials. The consequences for exceeding your purchase capacity are very different if it's 1 gallon versus 1 million, as an example, meaning the consequence for exceeding slightly as opposed to extraordinarily is measured into that amount of penalty, to use your expression, Sue, that they will pay for the next year. Meaning if you extraordinarily exceed it, that's far different than if you only minimally exceed it. So there are consequences that are intended to look to the possibility that there can be years of extraordinary drought and extraordinary heat like this that still try to encourage communities, when we ask for voluntary conservation, to step into that appropriately. That isn't intended to be punitive. It's intended really to go to the dilemma of all utilities, whether it's a natural gas utility or an electric utility or a water utility. We have to build facilities that need to meet anticipated peaks, and that's very expensive, because if I use 1 million gallons every day as a wholesale customer, that's very different than using 1 million gallons today and using 1 gallon tomorrow in terms of how we have to plan for
Right.
capital improvements and the investment you as a board make in the utility.
and can I add one point to that, Bill?
You can
And
add
that
more
is
than-
exactly part of how the purchase capacity sale has been structured, and why the last time we offered purchase capacity was in 2006. And added to what Rick said about the exceeding, what we were after people to do is at that point in time to estimate not just next year, how much purchase capacity they needed, but into a point in the future, because we were using that money to construct facilities that would provide for service into the future. So we don't want to be in the business of offering purchase capacity every year, because it doesn't facilitate our long-term planning and our construction of those larger projects to provide that capacity. So there has been some thought put into how this was structured, as far as rather infrequent, quite frankly, offerings of purchase capacity, and urging somewhat, by the way it was constructed, customers to purchase out there for their future needs, because by doing that, they're telling us what their future needs are and allowing us to construct and provide for those. So there is a strategy to all of that.
And without putting too fine a point on it, because I think we're probably into the details that are maybe of interest to you, but may not be of a great deal of use to you, Rick and others who have been involved in crafting the purchase capacity agreements have also recognized that there are emergency events that can happen that might cause someone to exceed a purchase capacity. A water main break is an example, or a fire, or other catastrophe, I believe is the language under the agreement. If those are the trigger points that take a community over, then that provides us an opportunity to exclude them from the penalties, as you would say, for exceeding that. But high usage and other issues that are very justifiable, like a well failing, as an example, are not reasons to allow the purchase capacity agreement to essentially be ignored.
I look forward to the next after our board meeting discussion.
Yeah,
That was a
That's
nice
interesting.
transition for saying we've talked too much,
No,
Sue. I
that-
appreciate that.
This is great.
No, it's
Mike,
interesting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my appreciation to
Thank
Mike
you.
and to Peggy for presenting materials. We'll be providing materials next month for you on the enterprise asset management system and how that long-term process is working itself through, as well as some of the business justification for it. I know that that's of great interest to you. You've invested a lot of money in it, and we'll be drilling into it to provide you a little bit different insight into it. But that's what's scheduled for next month, Sue, for you to look forward to.
Good deal.
Adjourn the meeting then?
You have many favorites.
Anybody else have anything to say? Guess we're adjourned.